It was the dead of night. The flickering fluorescent lights in the old hospital corridor seemed to pulse with an eerie rhythm. Sarah had only been working the night shift for a few weeks, but she'd already grown accustomed to the unsettling silence that enveloped the building after hours. Still, something about tonight felt different, heavier, like the air itself was thick with dread. She sat behind the receptionist's desk, her fingers tapping anxiously on the keyboard. The hospital was almost empty at this hour, with only a few patients left in the ICU and the occasional nurse making rounds. She checked her watch. 2:15 a.m. That's when she heard it, a faint tapping sound, like someone knocking lightly on the glass doors of the waiting room. She froze, looking up. The waiting area was dark and empty, save for a few chairs stacked neatly against the wall. No one was supposed to be here at this hour. Her heart thudded in her chest. Maybe it was just a mistake, a trick of the mind from the silence. But the tapping continued, persistent, slow, and deliberate. Sarah stood up, her legs shaky, and walked cautiously toward the door. She hesitated, her breath shallow. The tapping stopped, replaced by a soft, raspy whisper that seemed to come from nowhere. "Help me." Her blood ran cold. The voice sounded weak, strained, like someone on the verge of death. But who was it? No one was supposed to be in the waiting room, and no one had arrived since the last patient hours ago. Gathering her courage, Sarah unlocked the door and stepped into the darkened room. Her flashlight beam cut through the gloom, illuminating the empty chairs and dusty magazines. Yet, just as she was about to turn back, she heard it again, closer this time. "Help me, please." It came from the corner. A figure, slumped in one of the chairs, its head hanging low. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The pale, gaunt face of a woman turned slowly toward her, her eyes hollow and lifeless. "Help me," the woman croaked again, her voice barely audible. Sarah stumbled back, her mind screaming to run, but her body wouldn't obey. Her flashlight flickered out, plunging the room into darkness. In the silence, Sarah's pulse roared in her ears. Her eyes strained to make out anything, but the shadows swallowed the light. Then she heard the slow shuffle of feet dragging on the floor. The woman was standing now, her body unnaturally stiff. Sarah could hear her breath, raspy, labored, as she took a slow step forward, then another and another. Each step was deliberate, as though the woman was testing her strength. "Help, me." The whisper was louder, more insistent now. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, Sarah turned to run, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. She tried to scream, but her throat was dry, her voice trapped. The room seemed to stretch, the walls closing in. The woman was right behind her now, her cold, clammy hand brushing Sarah's shoulder. Sarah gasped and twisted away, bolting for the exit. She flung the door open, her heart racing, but as she stepped into the hallway, it wasn't the safety she had hoped for. The lights had gone out. The hospital was pitch black. In the oppressive darkness, the whisper came again, this time from all directions. "Help me." Sarah spun around, but there was nothing. No one, just the echo of her own panicked breath. Suddenly, the lights flickered back on, and there in front of her was the woman. Her face was twisted in agony, her mouth open in a silent scream, her eyes black voids. Sarah's legs trembled, but she forced herself to back away, bumping into the wall. The woman took another step forward, her fingers now elongated, sharp as knives. They reached out, brushing Sarah's cheek, cold as death. Sarah whispered, "No, no." And then the woman lunged. But just before Sarah felt the cold hands grip her, the lights went out again. When the morning shift arrived, they found Sarah at her desk, her eyes wide open in terror, her body stiff and cold. The only trace of the woman was a single handprint on the glass waiting room door, small, delicate, and stained with dark, almost black blood. The hospital was never the same after that night. They say Sarah's ghost still roams the halls, forever trapped in that endless, creepy night shift.